Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to teach you guys how to color grade in Photoshop, or at least how I go about color grading in Photoshop. I think it's super valuable to learn this technique just because, unfortunately, for those of you that use Lightroom out there and exclusively use Lightroom out there, the results that you can get are extremely limited to where your image actually starts out at. I get, for example, a lot of questions about how to achieve bluer water or how to achieve lusher greens or whatever the particular color is, or even how I do stuff like this where I'll turn green leaves into blue leaves, or I'll turn red leaves into pink leaves, or do any of that sort of stuff with my portrait work. I get a lot of questions related to that, and that is unfortunately something that just isn't possible in Lightroom. It's something that's only possible in Photoshop, and it's something that's really valuable to learn because it means that you can begin to really create the images that you want to make rather than being restricted by the images that you've taken. Obviously, you want to do as best you can to search out those situations where the image is going to look as best as it possibly can straight at a camera, but if you can learn this technique and you can pair those two things up together, then you're going to be well on your way to creating images that really, one, tell a story because you're able to tell the story that you want to tell, and two, the images that you want to create, the ideas that you had before going out for that shoot. Because we all know that feeling when you get back from a shoot or you plan a shoot out and you're like, I really want to capture this, and this, and then you get out to the shoot, it doesn't really work, you come back and the images just aren't what you want. Specifically today, I'm going to be teaching you how I took this image of Hayden the other week. You guys would have seen a video on how I made the jellyfish glow, but equally as important is how I color graded the image to make those colors pop a little bit more than they already were. But first, if I'm a new face, this is the first time you're visiting my channel. My name is Tom Noske. I'm a photographer, digital artist, and filmmaker from Melbourne, Australia, who takes images like these. I'm first going to show you how I did this, and then I'm going to show you how I did this. So to start off with, I'm going to open up this folder here, and I'm going to walk you through how I go about doing this. You'll notice a lot of selective color adjustments. Now, I've been through this in a previous video, but I feel like I need to reiterate how important this technique is because not a lot of you saw that video. These selective color adjustments, all they are is just taking the specific color that you're working on and manipulating it one by one over and over again until you get the color that you want. Now, the reason why I've overlapped these is the benefit of using Photoshop rather than Lightroom for color adjustments is Lightroom is only able to manipulate from the image's starting point. You can't layer adjustments. So say, for example, if I'm in Lightroom and I move my yellows far enough to the green side that my yellows become green, if I then go and move my green slider, it's going to continue to think that those greens are still yellow rather than compounding that manipulation. So you can only start and finish from your image's starting point. Whereas the benefit of Photoshop is because it works in a layered system like this, you're able to layer color adjustments over and over again until you get the color that you want, which is why it's powerful enough to do things like this and do things like this, because you have so much more control. So the first one I'm going to delete, I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to add another selective color adjustment. And I'm going to walk you through one by one how I go about this. Now, have a goal in mind every single time you do this. My goal in mind here is to make those greens as rich as I possibly can in the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with that in mind. So I'm going to bring these reds up, I'm going to bring those magentas down, and I'm going to bring that about there. Now, you'll probably notice straight away that the changes are small. The changes are very small, and that's because there's not a lot of green in the image already. So we're starting at a point that makes it quite difficult to notice changes in the beginning. But that's why having this goal in mind before you even start is super important. So all I've done is I've gone through the three primary colors that I can see in the background: red, yellow, and green, and I've moved all the sliders closer to what will eventually become green. Now, you've got your neutral slider as well. It's powerful, yes, but it can make your image look fake, so be careful about how much you use this slider. You get the idea there. So I'm going to turn this first one back on. I'm going to get rid of this one, and we're going to walk through what I've changed here. So the neutrals, like I said, small and subtle changes. The greens, not so much because there's not a lot of green in the image. The yellows, but the main one here was the reds, because if I turn this on and off, you'll notice how much red was already in the image. All I've done for this second one is started from this point and then tried to push those greens a lot more. And you'll notice that there's already a lot of green in this image after that last one. So what I've done here is I've focused less on the reds and more on the yellows and greens to push those greens a little bit more. I think I would have gone down to the neutrals. Yeah, a little bit in the neutrals, but not a lot. The next stage, I've done the same thing again, and I've probably just focused on the greens for this one. Yeah, pushed the greens quite a lot, focused a little bit on the yellows, none on the reds, and a little bit on the neutrals. And then the last one I've added is the same thing again, but I've actually tried to bring those yellows back a little bit more. Now the thing about Photoshop is you always need to be thinking ahead. Now if I was to think, okay, this image looks a bit whack, like it's looking way too green, it's looking way too fake, then I wouldn't have pushed those colors as much as I thought. But whenever I'm editing my images, I always have a background color adjustment or color 1, and then I'll go and later on in the edit I'll have a color 2, which I'm going to take you guys through in a second. And then the last one here is a color balance adjustment, and color balance can be very powerful, but again, treat it simple. Treat it like it needs to be subtle, because it really can begin to make your images look fake. Now you'll notice that it looks fairly similar in the color 2 adjustment, just a little bit more extreme. So I've started this, I'm going to turn these off one by one and we're going to go through it together. The first one again is a selective color adjustment, and the reason why I've got this as a second color is because the first one had a mask. So the first one's got a mask that's blocking out Hayden. If I shift this off, you'll notice how much that's protecting Hayden, but this one doesn't have a mask, so it manipulates the whole image, and this is where you can start to begin to make your image look natural. The first one is just a very subtle yellows, I would assume reds, no, not reds, and greens adjustment, and probably a little bit of cyans as well to manipulate those jellyfish, make them look a little bit more. Now the second one is massively important. Now this is the first color lookup adjustment. Now this one is using my favorite color lookup, and it's foggy night. Now the way I've done this, go over to color lookup and I go down to foggy night. This is essentially like adding LUTs to your image, and then I bring it to 70. You'll notice that it's quite different. If I go from here and then turn this one on, there's a little bit more in the highlights that is still visible. And the way I've done that is I've gone in, I've right clicked on the color lookup option, I've gone to blending options, and I've brought those highlights back outside of the color lookup, because I don't want the color lookup manipulating those highlights. And then I'll press OK, and there you'll notice that the highlights are a little bit more protected than the other one. So I'm going to turn that off and go back here. The second one, I've added another color lookup, just a little bit less intense. So the same thing again, I've gone foggy night and I've brought the opacity down to 25. And then I've started with selective colors again. So a selective color that's bringing a little bit more warmth back into the image, because foggy night is quite an intense color lookup and it can desaturate your images quite a lot. So I've brought a little bit more saturation back with a selective color adjustment here, bringing a little bit more punch into the reds, the yellows, the greens, and the cyans, a little bit in the blues and magentas, but not too much. I wanted to keep the image looking natural. And again, neutrals, subtle. I've added 2 more selective color adjustments doing similar things, adding a little bit more color. I've then added a color balance adjustment layer just to add a little bit more purple and blues into the image, so cyans and blues. And then hue saturation, I've actually just brought the hue down a tiny little bit. It's very subtle, but it makes a huge difference. So you'll notice, again, if I go back here and I turn these off, this is the starting position of the image. So you can tell there's not a lot of color. It looks a little bit flat. It looks very fake. It's not the way I want it to look. There's a lot of ugly colors here. And then as well, if I turn all the layers off and I go back to here, that's the starting point. Good looking image, but not the colors that I'm looking for. And then if I go back here, that's the finishing point. So if I go back, starting point, finishing point. Now these are just results that you would not be able to achieve if you were just using Lightroom. So yeah, that's been today's video, teaching you guys how I color grade in Photoshop. Like I said just before, It's a really, really valuable technique, but a very simple technique that you guys can start using straight away. If you're new to Photoshop, I know how intimidating it can be. I remember when I first started out, even things like using adjustment layers was an intimidating idea. So if this is a technique that you start with, it's a very, very good starting position. So if you're someone who hasn't used Photoshop yet and you're watching this video out of just curiosity and you're like, oh, I don't know if I should do it, I don't know if I want to, this is a very good starting point. So if you're on the edge, start using this technique and just this technique in all your images, and it'll make a world of difference. And if you are a Photoshop veteran and today's video was something a little bit new, I would highly, highly recommend using this technique from now on. If you've enjoyed this video, if you've enjoyed any of my videos on my channel recently, I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the response that you guys have given my last few videos. It's been amazing to hear from you guys in the comments, to hear you guys enjoying the videos. So keep that up. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to keep this ball rolling and keep the videos coming for you guys. I've got some really awesome videos coming in the next few weeks. So like I said, if you've enjoyed this video, a like and a comment would be really, really appreciated. But as always, it's entirely up to you, and I'll see you guys next time.